Hello and welcome to a beginner's guide on how to manage crops in Stardew Valley. So obviously crops are a big part of this game. It is a farming sim after all. There's a lot more to the game, but in this tutorial you are going to learn all of the basics that you need to know about how to manage your fields and crops in Stardew Valley. So let's start with how the mechanics of growing crops actually work. It's pretty simple if you think about how you would do it in real life. You got to till the soil, you got to plant the seed, and then you got to water that seed on a regular basis. In terms of those mechanics, it's fairly straightforward. Like I said, you need to till the soil, plant the crop, and water the crop. To till the soil, you use your hoe. To water the crop once you get it planted, you use your watering can. You can also use sprinklers, and that's a big thing to consider in terms of the design of your fields. Most players go for a 3x3 grid early on, or at minimum just kind of keep in mind that you want to do rows or columns of 3. As you get farther into the game, if you get to the point where you're now talking about iridium sprinklers, that's where a 5x5 grid becomes more effective. Just keep that in mind early on, is that it is good to try and stick with rows or columns of 3 because of the level of tools that you have available to you at that time. Now, in game, if it's raining, you don't need to water those crops. The one exception to the rule is rice. You never need to worry about watering rice as long as you plant it next to water. Now, rice is not very profitable, so we're going to kind of talk about maybe some of the other different kinds of crops and how the different seasons play a role. But the bottom line is the basics are till that soil, plant the crop, and then water it. Let's talk about how tools can impact your strategy and your level of effort that you have to put in to managing your fields. So when you start the game, you've got basic tools. They have not been upgraded whatsoever. They're not very efficient. You can only use it on one space at a time. As you go along, you can upgrade your tools. We're not going to get into how exactly you do that. That's for another video, but the bottom line is as you upgrade those tools, they become a lot more efficient and make it way easier for you to manage large chunks of crops as you go along. Another big piece of this strategy is going to be sprinklers. The more of those you can use, the less watering you've got to do yourself, and that gives you time and energy back to your day to be more productive towards other things, and time and energy are two of your biggest resources in this game. Another big thing you've got to consider is the change of seasons. So when you start the game, you're on the first day of spring. You've got 4 weeks to grow whatever crops you can and harvest them before the end of that season. Otherwise, if they are not a multi-season crop, they will just basically turn into weeds on the first day of the following season. Keep in mind that there are a few crops that do grow for multiple seasons, but for the most part, the crops that you plant in the beginning of your season are going to be single season crops, so you got to be careful that you don't plant something and there not be enough days in the season left to actually get to the harvest. And that is a huge disaster if you waste time and resources planting something, nurturing it along, and then you find out on the first day of summer or on the last day of spring that you are not going to get to harvest that resource and capture the goodness from that income. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are crops that continue to produce a harvest after they reach maturity. Great examples of this are strawberries, blueberries, cranberries, and most importantly, ancient fruit. If you plant ancient fruit in your greenhouse once you have access to it, it can be a massive money maker because it continues to grow after it reaches its maturity, and then every 7 days you can count on a big harvest that's going to net you a ton of cash. You can use those to make extremely profitable wine. But again, keep in mind that with those crops that continue to produce after harvest, the big value is not only the profit that they bring you, but the fact that you don't have to take the time and energy to replant once you harvest the first time. There are three big things to consider when you're trying to decide which crops you actually want to plant in the first place. The three are profit, effort, and what else you might actually need that crop for in the first place. So when we talk about profit, it's pretty straightforward. How much money do I have to spend on this, and how much money am I going to make on it as a result? The second big thing to consider is effort. If you have to plant something 7 times throughout the season and harvest it and then plant again, water again, etc., that's going to take a lot of time and energy. Whereas if you plant something that's going to continually grow after it reaches harvest, you have that advantage of not having to deal with replanting after you harvest the first time. So that is a big factor to consider. For example, if you're going to plant pumpkins versus cranberries, you might make roughly the same amount of money for the season, but you only have to plant those cranberries one time, whereas pumpkins, you're going to have to spend another day planting them halfway through the season. The final thing to consider is what you actually might need those crops for in the first place. For example, you know you're going to need a parsnip, a potato, a green bean, and a cauliflower for the community center, so you probably want to get those planted early in your first spring and get those out of the way. There are other things that you might need crops for example, help wanted ads, quests, etc. So keep in mind that it's probably a good idea to plant a few of just about everything. There's also an achievement that asks for you to ship 15 of each crop. So if you're going for all of those achievements, that's one that you're going to want to keep in mind, but probably something for later in the game versus trying to knock that out your first season on a new farm. I hope that this video was extremely helpful for you, and I hope that it makes your adventure in Stardew Valley a success. For more information and for more videos, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and comment below. We'll see y'all next time.